Hi, and welcome to CMO Journeys. I'm Christian Badak, and on this show, I talk with the marketing leaders behind some of today's most interesting brands. We get into their career paths, how they think about marketing, and how they work with agencies. The Office of the Illinois State Treasurer plays a major role in the financial lives of Illinois residents, from managing the state's investment portfolio to helping people across programs tied to college savings, retirement, disability savings, and unclaimed property. Craven brings a unique mix of journalism, public affairs, communications, marketing, and public sector leadership to that work as Chief Marketing and Communications Officer. Karen, welcome to CMO Journeys.
Thank you, Christian. It's great to be here.
So this is CMO Journeys, and I like to go back to start my initial questions. And I want you to think back to maybe when you were in high school or college, and what was something about your early life that people might not expect to know about you today?
Well, anyone who started off in journalism can appreciate doing a copywriting class. And for that class in particular, we had to write our own obituary. And when I wrote that I would be the next Mike Royko in Chicago. Mike Royko is a famous Chicago Tribune, also Chicago Sun-Times, I think originally Chicago Daily News, if I'm not mistaken, columnist. And he was true Chicago. And I grew up on the southwest side of the city. I'm the daughter of a firefighter and a former nun. And yes, they met after she left the convent. So it was a moment like we all have in life where I stepped back to look forward, like, where do I think I'm going to go, in 20 years? And I didn't get there. I did become a columnist at the Northern Star, and wound up, I really did love opinion writing, but journalism was the first part of my career. And I probably have only told that story a couple times, just because it was really a great aspiration of mine. It didn't happen, but I did write obits for the Chicago Tribune. I was on the obituary desk one year, so maybe that's what I was foreshadowing. I don't know.
That is funny. Interesting. Yeah, I've actually done that exercise as a kind of a goal setting, exercise. It's pretty powerful, I will say. So as you mentioned, you started your career in journalism, eventually moved into government, public affairs, associations, education, et cetera. When you look back, do you see that as one connected journey, or does it feel like different chapters?
Oh, yeah. I feel like my whole career has been, at each step has been connected to the next. And a lot of that has to do with my upbringing. My parents were very civically engaged and politically active. They both ran for office. I saw journalism as a path through which I could still be involved in accountability and government, but never saw myself as an elected official. So I mean, ironically, like I crossed over from journalism to the dark side, as we used to call it, when I first went into government. I happened to be on an elevator at Daily Center, and the woman said, "Would you ever, consider being a press secretary?" And I was like, "You want me to be a flack? What?" And I thought about it, and I was like, "Wait, I get to take everything that I've learned in journalism, and now I get to work with the press, and I work in government, and what would government would be about transparency and accountability." And so I felt like all these moves really led me to the place I am today. But I would say that same thing about 20 some years ago when I first went into government, that first decade in my career between deciding that I was going to go into print journalism, going into print journalism, being open to that, and then saying, wait a second, okay, maybe I can do this. And I mean, I don't credit myself with making all kinds of good decisions. I don't think that that's necessarily the case, but I do think that when a door opens, you should consider the opportunity. It's not always the right opportunity, but you should listen. And also, be grateful and humbled by it. And also, I had great mentors too who would say, "What? Somebody wants you to be a press secretary? You'd be a great press secretary." So
Mm.
half the time, I never believed in myself, and I had other people who helped me, get over the finish line and make those
Yeah.
decisions.
Yeah. Was there one of those leaps that you made where you felt like, I'm not sure I'm ready for this, but I'm going to do it anyways?
Yeah,
And what did it
well,
feel like in that moment?
there were they were sequential. So the first was when I left state government in 2004. Some people may remember that Rob Blagojevich was the governor then, and I was overseeing education. I was overseeing public affairs for the State Board of Education. So that was a $20 billion agency with 888 school districts, just a very high profile agency, but it was supposed to be apolitical. And so it had gubernatorial appointees that were both politically and geographically balanced. But it was very obvious that what was happening at the legislative level through the executive branch, this agency was going to be taken over. So the writing's on the wall. I have reporters calling me. They're interviewing for my job. I'm not even out the door yet. And I have somebody who says, "Would you like to do government affairs for a national child care company?" And I was like, I can't do I can't do government affairs. What are you talking about? I'm, in communications. And they're like, "Karen, you have been doing government affairs for the past 4 years. You've been doing government affairs for as long as you've been in journalism." And so that person initially was Greg Davis, who was he was the general counsel at La Petite, and also Bill Van Heist. He was the chief revenue officer and also oversaw marketing. And between the two of them, they convinced me to go that route. And then a few years later, when the company was acquired, I went back to after the company was acquired, and I did a number of advocacy work, and I did a lot in that time period. And I had an opportunity with an association, the Association for um, Plastic Surgeons. They wanted to give me a director of marketing job. And I was like, "I don't do marketing. What are you talking about?" And Bill Van Heist, who is still my mentor, from years ago, said, "Karen, yeah, of course, you can do marketing." And I went there and then then I oversaw corporate development. And then I went back into public affairs, into policy. And so it's all like those two things. I think had I not, if I didn't have those two people back at when I made the transition from government to La Petite to corporate, I don't know that I'd ever be back where I'm at today, because that transition into marketing and really at that point in my life flipping, comms used to be superior, marketing used to be inferior, and today it's flipped to marketing is superior and communications is subordinate. And not because one is better than the other, but we have to start with the who in a way that we never had before, because we have so many channels through which we can communicate with people. And those opportunities were really critical to where I am today. And I'm super grateful for the people along the way who have helped me make those decisions.
Yeah, yeah. Let's talk about that. You'd mentioned some of these mentors that you've had. Was it a specific piece of advice that they said, or I don't know, maybe you got inspiration also from a book or something else? But what's something that you carry with you that helps you make decisions today?
I think the what I said earlier, just because the opportunity is presented doesn't mean it's the right opportunity. And I don't know where I learned that, but I know that it happened through trial and error, and also with the help of really good, as I said, mentors. One of whom, the last journalism job that I had was actually out in Portland, Maine, and Allison Harris was the editor of the book, the portfolio of trade publications that I went to work for. It was United Publications. And that was like, am I really going to move from Chicago to Portland to write business, but it was part personal and it was part professional at the time. So being fearless when you're really afraid is both a humbling and an energizing way to approach life, especially your career. And I've done it, but again, I guess I've trusted my gut. I've trusted the people who I surround myself with, and I also wind up with some fantastic cheerleaders, as well as people who have dissuaded as well. That that said, wait, this is. I've had plenty of opportunities where I've stepped back. I've done the 5-year forecast. I've looked at it financially. I've looked at it from a management standpoint. In this role, I could be making this much. In this role, I could be making this much. But in the one with the $10,000 more in salary, I'm going to be managing 20 people. Well, I went with the one where I wasn't managing 20 people because I just left a job where I was managing a big team, and that is I think that's wisdom acquired from also knowing marketing and communications it's an always on job. Like you're looking at things through so many lenses, especially now that I'm back in government because I have an elected official. I have an office, I have programs, I have fiduciary responsibilities. And so how a story can play out, what we communicate into the public, it could iterate in a million different ways, and sometimes good and sometimes bad. So how big, I think this is an important question for everyone. I've certainly asked it of myself. As you move up the ladder, like how big do you want to be? How important is a title to you? Because is it the title or is it the work? And it's taken me a long time I guess, a lot of trial and error to find a balance between those two things. And I do think that as I have compared myself to friends, and I've compared myself to other to men, I think that and there's research that shows this, that a man will apply for a job because even if he's only 50% qualified, and women can be more reserved in that. And I still haven't overcome that. I never want to, oversell myself, but I also have learned that sometimes I'm the person who undersells or doesn't even believe in my own abilities. There isn't a day that goes by or hasn't gone by in a large part of my career where I haven't had at least a moment of imposter syndrome. I think it's always there.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate you being vulnerable there, and I can relate to that as well. I think many of us do struggle with that at times, but clearly you've you've been figuring out ways to overcome that. So
Yeah.
don't sell yourself short there.
Thank you.
So you have described your approach for my research around 3 ideas: educate, engage, and empower.
Yes.
How do these show up in the ways that you're leading your team and shaping communication for the treasurer's office?
Those 3 things I believe go back to journalism, is that our first job as reporters is to educate the public, and then hopefully if it's a public policy issue, you engage. And maybe that means that they go vote, or they're empowered to run for office, or to change a system, or to file a FOIA. That is very similar to what we do today. The reason why the Chief Marketing and Communications Officer was created in the office, I'm the first person to do it in its current form, is because we have public programs that are really consumer facing. They're financial products. So with any financial product, you have to market it, and you have to put money behind it, and you have to build it. And that, to your earlier point about, I think it was before we started, about working with agencies and how do you engage with them, there's a big responsibility in finding the agency that's going to communicate and to market ethically and transparently, because at the end of the day, we are government and government funded. So I'll give you an example of something that we just saw it crossed the finish line last week as the General Assembly was wrapping up. So this we can't take credit for, but what we can take credit for, I'm saying me as part of Michael Frericks' administration, as part of his senior staff. He's been in office for 10 years, and there is a fund called the Illinois Funds, and that's a $10 billion fund that is tapped into willing participants by local governments throughout the state. And so by doing that, they have another investment vehicle as opposed to CDs, or some don't like to invest in the stock market, all kinds of things. And this ensures that they have liquidity. And that's important because I'll just use, we're in the Midwest, salt. All of a sudden it's a really snowy, winter, and they've tapped out of salt. So they need to go into those investments. So this model, it's been tried, it's been tested. Through the treasurer, we have earned in the last few years more than $1 billion in interest through our investments. So that shows that when you manage a portfolio, we're required to be prudent and conservative, but also wisely, you have the opportunity to earn investment income. And that goes back to these local governments. So this is government working for government. Now, how do we take this model and how do we apply it so that you or your friend, your neighbor, it can impact them in a different way in their communities? And what we've seen in the past few years, I could go back to when Governor Rauner was in office, and then most recently with President Trump coming into office and the cuts that have happened across the country for Medicare and Medicaid and social service agencies. When they are hit like that, these agencies are already very, they're strapped for cash. But is there a way that we can give them an opportunity to save a little bit more? So the treasurer, together with our legislative team and some fantastic sponsors, we introduced the not-for-profit investment pool, and that's modeled after the Illinois funds. And it took 3 years. This is the third. It passed last year, but it was vetoed. We worked with the governor to change that, to make sure that it had assurances that frankly, like hate groups or people who could hurt other people, not really were vested in community service, that they were not part of it. And so it passed last week. It'll go to the governor for signature, and the press release is going out this morning. So what does all of that mean? Educate. It took us a long time to work with stakeholders to actually get them to understand that this was a good idea. Engage. When we did that and we found out there was a need, we were able to bring legislators on and sponsor that legislation. And then empower. First year, it didn't make it. Second year, it passed. Third year, the sponsors were still on board and they were willing to take it further, to work with the governor and to get it past the finish line. And during that time, we actually worked with advocates in a way that we hadn't done in many, many years, and brought on people who signed the letter to the governor, who put in witness slips. And we're talking hundreds of people over the course of the past 2 years. And that, Christian, that is where my world just comes full circle, because our entity is paid for by government. I draw my salary from the taxes I pay in Illinois. So we are of service. And how can we do something that's going to improve people's lives? And we're doing it. And I do believe that the governor, will sign that. And in a few months, we'll be in a position where we can support social service agencies that way. And that's just one example, and it's probably a long-winded one, but I think that it's relevant in this day and time I currently work in government. People do not have a great opinion of government. So how do you take an office that most people do not know what we do? They think we pay the bills, and we don't. We give the money to the comptroller, and the comptroller pays the bills. We are the chief investment officer. We have programs that support people through every stage of life, from the moment a child is born to the moment that people retire. We have programs that help them. And we do much more than the Constitution ever really intended. But legislators have, every year they've gone back to the treasurer and given him more and more responsibility, because we build programs that work and then we improve them. I like to say we are more than office. Like, what we do is more than one would expect. And if we can do even better than that, we're going to continue to do that. And that for me is incredibly fulfilling. Does that answer your question? It was a really long answer.
Yeah, no, it was great. It answered several of my other questions that
Okay.
I was going to ask already. So we nailed a couple of them there. So no, thank you for that.
You're
So
welcome.
as you think about this and the challenge that you have ahead of you, where do you see yourself allocating more marketing budget maybe over the next 12 to 24 months to accomplish those goals?
That is a great question. I think that we have traditional buckets that we dedicate funds to, and that is, right now it's roughly, for the specific agency that my team works for, it's about 1.5 million a year, and that goes towards our unclaimed property division. If people recall iCash, that's, hey, yeah, you might have received a letter in the mail from Treasurer Frerick saying, hey, you have money that you didn't even know about, and we've returned 2.5 billion there. And I would say, if we're going to spend money in that, we should actually look at other in languages outside of English, because you have language barriers. You also have banking. A lot of people are unbanked. So if they receive something like that, they think it's a scam. All of our programs have a credibility issue. So to find channels through which we can lend credibility, and say this isn't fake, this isn't a scam, that's an opportunity for us. And where I see that more and more is to take earned media and to push that out through social media, and then to create campaigns around that. So we do spend a considerable amount of money on digital. As a government agency, we have to work with a marketing agency to do that. Just the way that that Google and all the other digital vehicles that you would use, the way that they bill, it's not really possible from a procurement standpoint to do that. We also will invest a lot more money in the coming year in ABLE, and that's our program for folks who have a disability. They've incurred a disability before the age of 46. That age just went up this year. So we have two things happening there. We have the eligibility going from 25 really to 45. So it's up to 46 years old, which increases the number of people who are eligible. And we're going through a rebrand with that as well. And we've spent the last 2 years testing and iterating on digital communication. We know that we are in a position where we have seen the success. We can get people actually to the website and to start the application process, but they get stuck. So a lot of investment on the engagement and the empowerment side is where I expect us to spend our dollars. And that also will be out live in the community, working with partners. Folks may think this sounds, old school, but there are plenty of advocacy organizations that they have their own base, and they still remain tremendous vehicles through which you can communicate with people. So I'm not afraid to, sponsor a newsletter for a year and put in what some people would say an editorial, our own take on content. And that we've seen with our Secure Choice program years ago when we launched that. We worked with the Illinois Hispanic Chamber of Commerce, and it was something new to them. Like they hadn't had government come to us, so we wound up becoming almost a beta, for how can this work with other government agencies, and we've done that repeatedly over the years because I think as working in government, you have to test and trust the channels. At the end of the day, the data makes the decision. That's not, I'm not going to go and spend money where it's not going to reach people because A, that's not responsible, and B, I'm not here to spend, taxpayer dollars foolishly. So secure choice a little bit, but iCash probably through other languages. Other than English. There's a few other programs that we have, but that we've rolled out with regards to student loans outside of our 529 and our college savings programs. But similar to the 529 program, we provide capital to lenders, and then the lenders are able to take that money and make it available to Illinois students and families. So it's really their responsibility to do the marketing. We can build awareness about the fund, and us building that fund and the programs that are made available through that. But putting paid money behind that, it falls into a really gray space with lending and fiduciary responsibilities and other things that there are some things that can be really tricky given that we're working with financial products and we can't make the promise of people actually getting a return on their investment because that is because no investment is guaranteed. So there you go.
Sure. So you outlined a number of different programs here. For agencies that are listening, wanting to do business with a state-run office like the Illinois Treasurer's Office, it's different than selling into a private company. And I'd would love to hear, can you walk us through, how does that process actually work behind the scenes? Everything from your initial kind of needs identification to RFPs to partner selections.
It is a very rigorous process. And again, it's one of those things that changed a lot in the wake of us living in a state where we've had several governors go to jail for some shady things. So people can say that procurement is tough in Illinois, but the guardrails are there for a reason. The easiest way to get started is to understand government itself. So I work for a constitutional officer that also includes not only the treasurer, but it includes the comptroller, it includes the attorney general, it includes the secretary of state, the lieutenant governor, and the governor. So the governor has all of the state agencies, Department of Human Services, and things that show up in our daily lives a lot differently than the treasurer's signature on a check is much different than the Secretary of State's signature on your driver's license, right? There's just a different type of exposure there. So each one of these agencies procures separately. So if you're interested in working with state government, you should go to each one of those organizations and look at the procurement code. You can typically sign up with our office. You can sign up for updates. If I have people who are of interest, I always pass that on to our procurement officer. We have a procurement officer in our office, as do other offices. We try to forecast out at least, a year in advance if we have any substantial changes. Contracts typically go for anywhere from, 2 to 3 years with the potential for 10 years is the longest period of time with the ones that I have been involved with. And when I started, we were approaching that with the agency that we had worked for almost a decade. So I was thrown into that right away and had not done government procurement before. But to your point, like, what do we need? What do we have now? What do we like? What don't we like? What are the programs that we see coming? that will be improved or iterated, that we're going to need additional dollars for? What can we do internally? What is better to outsource? Like when you talk about the digital experience, especially on the spend side of what levers to pull, I greatly rely on our agency for that, because that's something that they do with all kinds of other clients. Um, and then you draft it and you vet it with a few folks, and then we actually create a committee. So in my instance, I had folks from financial products, from iCash, from Marcom, from legal, and I think it's typically between 5 to 7 people, and that process can take anywhere from, 2 to 3 months from the time the RFP is opened up to the time we go through the review. Sometimes there's in-person interviews, other times it's written. There's always written information, just legally you have to have that. And I will say, like, the things that I looked for within this most recent marketing contract that we did was flexibility, understanding the entire umbrella, what falls under the treasurer's office, and how many. And if you were to compare the treasurer's office to the governor's office, so Treasurer Frericks oversees 529, ABLE, Secure Choice, all of these programs. Very similarly, in the governor's office, those are agencies. The size of those are agencies. I mean, we manage more than $60 billion, and almost $25 billion alone is for college savings. So that's a lot of money. And having an organization that understands all of those. And do you need, brand continuity? Does look, does feel, do those things really matter when it comes to government? How do we talk about these programs? Because in my position, traditionally the programs were leading the charge with regards to how we describe the programs. And on paper, that's totally legit, appropriate. But how we speak publicly, how we engage consumers is quite different than how we describe government programs. So making sure that I had an agency that worked with government before and could it's not dumb it down, it is make it smart, make it clear, make it concise, and make sure that it gets out there and it captures people's attention. What does every marketer want to do? You want to pique people's interest. That's the engage, right? And then if they take the action, then that's the empower. And so we had seen that with all of the organizations, all the agencies that applied. They were all very, very good, but Purple Group, the group that we went with, understood the umbrella best, and also understood the importance of bilingual communication, and how are we going to separate some of our programs out and make sure that we're reaching all audiences and getting past those obstacles. So that I went into my experience, but it was it's weighted. It is very it's very well constructed to avoid any type of bias or undue influence. And I was really impressed with the process, because at the end of the day, I'm the stakeholder, right, within the organization that's going to be responsible for it, but I didn't make that decision alone. The numbers, just like we talked about data earlier, it was the numbers and how it was all weighted that it shook out the way that it did.
Sure. I got one kind of follow-up, and I'll try to make it brief here, so I know we're getting up on time here. But we have a lot of agencies that follow us and work within, or want to work within, kind of the government segment. And one of the pushbacks that we hear is that, these are just catcalls. There's 60, 70, 80 agencies sometimes that are responding, to the same RFP, and these are, many times they already know who they're going to be working with already. We don't have the opportunity in many cases to even meet the team, just to kind of understand who they are. Like, how would you maybe respond to some of those, I guess, criticisms of the process, or, what might they maybe misunderstanding about the process? What would you do maybe if you're an agency and thinking about that?
That is a great question. And um, I probably on the proactive side, because I used to do this when I was on the agency side, I would prospect through the constitutional or the agency offices that you're really looking at. And you can also do research with, because everything is transparent. You can go through the controller's office and look at what the current length of contract is. And then you wouldn't have to approach me. You can approach the procurement officer and ask, is this something that's, on the table? Because if so, we would like, we're interested in this. And so at that point, you've already ensured that you've put your marker there, right? Like they're gonna follow up with you if there is an RFP that comes out. Um, I have had people approach me through LinkedIn and say, "Hey, I'm interested in such and such." I talk to people when they have questions about that. I mean, my current contract is through 2028, and that's the largest one that I have. That's fiscal 28. So um, that's how it has worked on my end. I think we wound up with like 7 agencies, and I know in other parts of the organization it's not a lot. We do not get swamped, and I don't know if that's because we do things differently or people aren't aware. I'm not quite certain. But I understand their stress too. I've been in that position where I've applied, and not necessarily on the government side, just with other work in my past, and spent a lot of time and money and effort to put a proposal together, and then just kind of be dismissed. That's never fun.
Sure, sure.
I hope that's helpful because I feel like I mean, I can't really speak to other agencies.
Yeah, yeah. No, that is helpful. I'm sure it does vary different agencies, but it's always good to hear from, different perspectives. Well, this has been really good. I want to ask one final question outside of work.
Okay.
We've talked a lot about work already, but what's something that just gives you energy and helps you reset when work gets too intense?
Um, well, I was just in Portland, Maine, over the weekend, and that always helps me reset. But the thing that consistently does is I started to practice improv almost 9 years ago. And it was something on my bucket list, something I thought I would never do. And I started that and have not stopped. And I practice at least twice a week or twice a month and perform at least twice a month. And the women who I play with are all extraordinary friends. And as everyone says, the truth comes out somehow. It definitely comes out in comedy and improvisation, and it helps ground me. It also helps me step away from the stress of life and to remember that not to take myself too seriously and to find the humor in everything.
I love that. Second City by chance, or?
No, no. The founder, Jeff Ash, was at Second City in LA, and he moved out to Chicago, lives not far from me in DuPage County in Wheaton, and was taking classes again at Second City and said, "This is crazy. There are people in the western suburbs who want to do this." So 11 years ago, he founded West Side Improv in downtown Wheaton. And I think altogether, we've got a community of about 250 players.
Wow.
And yeah, it's really a joy. It's a community that is super important to me, and I am grateful for every day.
Yeah, I love that. We'll have to talk more about that
Yes,
offline.
yes. I'll have to send you some tickets so you can
Yes,
check it out.
absolutely. So, Karen, this has been amazing. Thanks again for the conversation, the insights. To everybody watching, don't forget to follow CMO Journeys for more conversations with the marketing leaders that are shaping what's next. I'm Chris Dividak. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll see you on the next episode.